Welcome to the Sample Chapter Podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. Here's your host, Jason A. Meiske.
Season's greetings, my friends. This is episode 46 of the Sample Chapter Podcast. That's right, this is the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their published books, meaning you can go right out and pick this book up after you hear about it. You can find this show on all podcast venues, but I guess the number one place for you to find us would be on iTunes. That is the place with the most traffic. So if you subscribe to us, you won't miss out each week whenever we come back with another author, another book, and another sample chapter. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to tell a friend. That is how we spread the word and get these authors that come on every week, get a little more attention to them because they all deserve it. They've all done a lot of hard work, and I really appreciate that they're taking the time to come on here and talk with me. And I would love, just absolutely love, to gain some audience and spread the word about each one of them. You can also find us online through social media on Facebook and Twitter. That is just the Sample Chapter Podcast on either one of those. If you want to reach out to us, you can use either one of those methods, or you can email us at samplechapterpodcast@gmail.com. So if you're an author yourself, if you have an author you'd like to hear about, any of those things, just go ahead and reach out to me. Let me know who you are or who the author is you'd like me to interview, and I will definitely follow up with them and see what we can get done, and it would be great. Today's guest, actually, it worked out just like that. I had just recently heard today's guest, which is Ernest Solar. I had just listened to him on the Emmett Blackwell show, which Emmett was kind enough to have me on there a few weeks ago, about a month ago now, I guess. But Emmett has a fantastic show. He brings on authors, entertainers, and I just heard the episode with Ernest when, I think it was like within a day later, Ernest reached out to me, so that was really cool. For now, though, we'll keep going with a little bit of news and stuff. You might hear that I'm not as up as usual right now. I'm actually cold. It is really cold, and it's really, really early. It is 5:31 in the morning. I am up for you, my wonderful listeners, because I love you guys. I appreciate that you come back every week, and it makes it worth it to get up this early. But it is currently 61.4 degrees in my garage office, and I'm realizing that my slippers and robe aren't quite cutting it. I'm also realizing that renovations I did to my office this summer, I forgot to take into account that, I might need my space heater back in here. I got things set up so that my fan would blow in a direction that I would feel the fan and it would feel comfortable, but it would also filter circulate my smoke from my cigars around to the window. And in doing so, the way I set everything up, I've got power cords now running everywhere, and I've actually used up all my outlets, so I don't have a place to plug in my heater anymore. So I'm gonna have to rethink this a little bit. Of course, I don't always get up at 5:30 in the morning to get this recorded, but like I said, I do this for you all. You guys mean a lot to me, and I'm really enjoying this show, doing this show for you each week, so it's worth it. But fortunately, I've got my coffee. The irony of getting up really, really early, and some of the stories you're going to hear today from Ernest, that irony has not escaped me. You're gonna understand what I'm talking about once we get into the interview. Oh yes, wonderful hot coffee. Anyway, I did get to go somewhere really cool this past weekend. I took my wife out. She just finished what is the absolute toughest semester of school so far. For med school students, they all have this, one semester that's just a real bear. 5 classes, 2 clients, and papers galore, that she's got to write. And it's just been a nightmare situation for her trying to get through this, but she made it through. Grades are all coming in, and she's done another fantastic semester. I'm really, really proud of her. So anyway, so I'm telling you that to tell you that. So I took her out for the weekend, went off up to Kansas City, and just had a wonderful time getting away from it all, getting away from the house, getting away from distractions, and it was really great. And while we were up there, we made sure to swing by Half Price Books. It was my first time going in there. I'd heard friends talk about the store several times. Normally I go into some of the big names. We'll go in there and look around. But I gotta tell you, Half Price Books was awesome. That was so cool, walking around, checking out the all the old paperbacks, and oh my gosh, it was fantastic. I'm definitely going back. I was a little bit disappointed because I only found one book by Robert McCammon in there, but it turned out it was one of them that I was looking for, though. So it was Gone South is one of his books that I found. It's a classic paperback cover, so it's not one of the updated ones. So that was pretty exciting, and it was only $3. Oh my gosh, I was really thrilled. But yeah, Half Price Books, that's an awesome place. Like I said, I'm going to be going back. I recommend that you look it up, check it out online, see if you can find it, if there's one in your area. If not, just find out who's your local bookstore. Do they sell independents? Contact them and say, hey, do you have a section for indie books? I know Half Price Books, they do carry indie books, but they don't separate them for indies. They get whatever the book is, whatever the genre, that's where they go. So I talked to the manager there for a while, and that was really cool to hear that. Yeah, they're in there. He said he could probably look it up and see, what ones they are. But he said, yeah, if you're looking for a certain book or a certain person, then just go through the aisles by author and by genre. So that was cool. I was really happy to hear that. And I know my local bookstore here in Warrensburg, they do have a local author section, and I do have some books there. So that's a really cool thing. It's a fantastic way to support not only the local bookstores, but also your local authors who, they've put in just as much work as a traditional author. And I don't want to put any of them down because we've had both traditional and indie authors on this show. And, they all work really, really hard. They're all just trying to tell the best story that they can. And, God bless them for the work that they do. I understand. I've been there too. So, it's such a cool feeling because you can find my books and you can find, Robert McCammon. You can find Stephen King. You can find W.L. Ripley. You go through there and you find all these fantastic books. You never know what you're going to do. Just go browse sometime at your local bookstore. Show them some support. And then if you find something cool, make sure to put that out there on social media. Let people know, hey, I went to Reader's World. I went to Half Price Books. Look what I found. This is awesome. It helps everybody. It helps the store. It helps the author. It's just a good way to get a little more notice for those. And it's like we talked about last week with the Fairy Project. Christmas is coming. It's time to pick up some books for some friends. So 'tis the season, my friends. Spread the cheer and get a book for a friend. Coffee. Oh, I love it. Well, this is that part of the show where we're going to do our sponsor spot, because I owe a great big thank you, as always, to U-Store All out of Warrensburg, Missouri. U-Store All is the absolute best place if you are looking to store your household goods, if you're moving, if you just bought a new house, or if you're building a house, which is something that I know happens a lot. You're building a house, and your old house sold really quick. Oh my gosh, now what are you going to do? I got to get everything put into storage. No problem. Get a hold of U-Store All out of Warrensburg, Missouri, and let them know your situation. They know how to sort out what your needs are for sizing, so that way you're not getting a unit too big, definitely not too small, because that's a problem. If you get one too small and you still got stuff laying around your yard or whatever. So contact them, and they will help you out. The facility is fully fenced in. It's gated. You get your own private gate code. They have 24-hour video surveillance on more than 40 cameras, with more cameras going up over the next month. And they also offer climate control, which is heated, cooled, and has dehumidification. So go to ustoreall.net. That is the letter U, STORALL.net, and contact them today. Well, like I said, the irony of me being up this doggone early in the morning, and then today's guest, it's not lost on me. Ernest Solar is a writer, storyteller, and explorer with a passion for cryptid creatures and paranormal. Now, when I say cryptid, maybe you don't know what that is, or if I say cryptozoology, you might not know what that is either. But that is the research, the science of legendary creatures, specifically in this case, Bigfoot. Ernest has gone out personally searching for Bigfoot, and this is just such a cool subject. I remember I've been into Bigfoot probably all my life too, and I remember in the 70s when there was a lot of hubbub over Bigfoot, and oh my gosh, he's all over the West Coast. I missed out on the big heyday in the 60s with you get the film that's now parodied on all over the time. But throughout the 70s, I remember that being on the news a lot. People looking for Bigfoot. Hey, Bigfoot stole my dog. Bigfoot stole my baby. I've got Bigfoot's baby. Different things like that. I just remember this being such a huge thing growing up. And I had a love for Bigfoot myself. I came across a book in the school library called The Boy Who Saw Bigfoot. And, it's one of those, Bigfoot is one of those things that it reaches in and it can tickle the fantastic side of you and make you, it makes you wonder, could it be possible? And I know I'm getting off on my own little tangent here, and it's just such a cool thing. Ernest he's got his story today, Spirit of Sasquatch, about a boy going through experiences with a Sasquatch. You're going to want to hear the whole interview. You want to listen to not only about Ernest and his other books, and then we talk about this book as well, but you also get to hear Ernest tell some stories about true life events while he was Bigfoot hunting, and including one amazing tale that took place. It's really, really cool. You don't want to miss out on it. During the reading, I do want to give you a forewarning. Now, Ernest is he's a professor at a university, and we were doing our interview while he was at school on a break, and the reading went fantastic. Ernest did such a great job, but apparently there was a door open or something, and during his reading, I didn't catch it, but going back through and editing, I realized that somebody had been walking by and talking in the background, and Ernest had earphones on, so he didn't hear it either. If you hear that, don't worry about that. But it shows how dedicated Ernest was with his reading, because like I say, he does a fantastic job. He really draws you in and tells a great tale, and like I said, you don't want to miss this. So let's get us on over to our interview with Mr. Ernest Solar. Hello, fans. It is another episode of the Sample Chapter Podcast. Welcome. This week, I have a fantastic storyteller for you, writer and explorer Ernest Solar. Now, I should have asked you beforehand about that last name. Did I say that correct?
Yes, you did.
Okay, fantastic, great. And I just heard you on the Emmett Blackwell show not too long ago, so I should have known. I think maybe I did know that in the back of my mind, but so Emmett, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I have been a writer for all my life since I was a young boy. I've been a writer telling stories. I've always been fascinated with cryptid animals and paranormal activity and UFOs, and so that kind of bleeds into my stories that I tell. My day job, I'm a professor at Mount St. Mary's University. I teach undergraduate and graduate students special education and how to work with students with special needs in the classroom. yeah, that's about it. I'm pretty simple.
But that's good, though. That's good. I mean, it gives you time to, when you have a simple job, kind of like what I've got, it allows the mind to just roam free, and then we can put that down on the paper later on.
Yeah, it's true. My commute to work is about 45 minutes, so that gives me a lot of time to sit and daydream while I'm driving up to campus.
Now, do you have like a Bluetooth or anything set up to record or write down notes for yourself, or?
Yeah, you would think I would, but no. It's funny that you say that. I've always played the scenarios of my stories and the plot lines and the characters in my head, and when I come across something that I really like or a scene that I want to write about, I literally play it over in my head over and over and over again until I get to sit down and actually type it out or write it out. I've always kind of been like that. It's never really crossed my mind to record it out loud. I think it might stem from my philosophy of not telling someone a story that I want to write. Because when I teach, I tell stories when I teach. And so I'm afraid that if I have a story in my head that I want to write and make a short story or a novelette or a book, and if I tell you out loud, that I won't have the motivation to actually write the story down. So when I have this scene in my head, I'm afraid if I record it, then I lose the essence of it. Does that make sense?
It does, actually. I think I understand exactly what you're saying, because I've had times where an idea is stuck in my head for a long time, and then I finally say, I should write this down before I forget it.
Right.
And so then I do, and then I put the note aside, and then I do forget it. And then I forget where I put the damn note. So somewhere here I've got stacks and stacks of notes and ideas and other things, but I'll be damned if I can remember them later.
Yeah, so the writing project that I'm working on right now, I tend to write in a very linear fashion. I tend to write, from beginning to end. But for whatever reason, this particular story, it's been coming to me in like chunks and pieces. And so I do have a document where it's like beginning to end, but then I have another document that has all these chunks and pieces. And I'm like, okay, this is going to fit in somewhere. I know it's going to fit in somewhere. I'm not sure where, but I'll get it in there somehow. So.
Well, looking at your library, you've got 3 books under your belt so far. Two Moon Rising, The Well House, and of course today's subject, Spirit of Sasquatch. Tell us about, I believe you said Two Moon Rising, that was your first book?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Two Moons Rising is about a young man with narcolepsy that falls asleep at random points of his life during the day, in the classroom, at work, wherever it may be. And when he sleeps, he dreams. And during his dreams, he realizes that we're being invaded by aliens that are on a second moon that orbit Earth that we're unaware of because the aliens have suppressed it from our subconscious mind. And then he figures out that he needs to save the world from these aliens through his dreams. And there's many threads in the story, and so I've done a lot of research and spiritual thought, and one of the things I came across is that we all have what's called a soul thread. So there's a thread that's attached to us, and that's our soul thread, and it's connected to God, the universe, higher power, whatever your definition is. And so I kind of grasped onto that concept. And so the story has many threads. And so it's one of those books that you kind of have to pay attention when you read it to piece it all together.
Okay.
Which I know some people don't like that, but being a first-time writer, author, and wanting to make an impression on the world, I went that route.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's always nice to have a story that you're peeling back the layers of it, and then you go back and, like, after you've read it, then you're like, well, wait a minute, and you go back, you reread it again, you're catching new things and realizing so many other things. It's almost like Inception in a way, where you're thinking like, man, there's just so many. Oh yeah, and then that. Oh, and then this over here, and that sounds really cool though.
Considering how cool Inception is, that is a huge compliment. Thank you.
And it just came to me because I just caught the ending of it the other day, and I was like, oh, I haven't watched this in so long, I got to check it out. So this is it's certainly something spiritual that I would have seen that the other day, and then we would talk today, and then that would come up. So something there in the air.
Yeah, I like it. I'm going with it.
There you go. Well, now what? Let's see, and then how about the Well House? What is this about?
The Well House is, as my wife would say, a effed up ghost story. And it is actually inspired by true events. I didn't put that on the cover just to sell books. I think a lot of writers can identify with this, but like we put ourselves into our stories, right? Like, yeah. I mean, maybe not literally, but there's always an element of us that's in the story. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to another writer about this. I think it adds to the authenticity of the story, mm-hmm. to the realness of the story that's being told. But so the Well House, when I first got into Bigfoot research, I thought I was going to be all high tech and professional, and so I bought a recorder and I went out into this part of the woods that no one ever goes to. It's, there's no trails, there's very little game trails. It's near an abandoned house that was built back in the 1800s. There's a house and a farmhouse, and it's back in this like part of the woods. And I put the recorder out one night because I was going to capture wood knocks, howls, something of that nature, right? Mm-hmm. So I set the recorder out. I went back the next morning, got the recorder. I'm listening to it the next day. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear what sounds like a little girl say, ta-da. I was like, whoa, hold on a second, right? So because of my own personal experiences and my own personal beliefs, I know that I'm quick to be like, oh, that's a ghost, or that's Bigfoot, or right. So like I have to be careful, right? I have to be careful with my experiences, and I have to question them. And so my wife, I feel, is I don't want to say she's skeptical, but she's not as quick to jump on the bandwagon. Mm-hmm. So I was like, Christine, you gotta listen to this. I was like, tell me what you hear. She was like, that's a little girl saying ta-da. I was like, right. This is like, hold on a second. And so then we got our oldest daughter to listen to it. She was like, that's a little girl saying ta-da. And I was like, oh, this is too good, right? And and that was at like 2 a.m. So what are the chances of some little girl at 2 a.m. running around the woods saying ta-da? Slim to none, right? So we like to speculate that it was a ghost, and it was maybe a ghost that used to live in that farmhouse. So then a week passed by, and my neighbor told me the pond in our neighborhood, last time they cleaned it, they found a sledgehammer and they found a bicycle. I was like, I'm sure if you kept draining it, you probably would have found a dead body too. And then he laughed and he said, well, it's funny you should say that. He was like, at the turn of the century, a farmhand got killed by that pond. And I was like, huh. So then that all kind of sat with me for a few weeks. And then this idea of the story came about, where I took the recording of the little girl saying ta-da, and I took a couple who had captured the recording, hence my wife and I. And so we capture this recording, we hear this little girl's voice, we think it's strange and it's odd, and then the next chapter is the little girl's life. And then the chapter after that is my wife and I having another weird paranormal experience. And so then I jump back and forth between the happenings of our paranormal life and the happenings of this little girl, and then at the end it all comes together. So it's kind of like a ghost story, because there's that ghost story element to it, but it's also this time dimensional shift back and forth between the two stories. But it all comes together at the end. Like, it's all joined together at the end. It's not disjointed.
Okay. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. So,
yeah. It was, I mean, in all reality, it was a fun story to write. So,
it seems like the ones that popped up on us that we didn't really plan out to begin with always seem to be so much fun. I love when you get those little nuggets of something that comes up and all of a sudden you just run with it. And it sounds like you have an amazing story on your hands with that.
I mean, that process is so fun now. And I think that's what I enjoyed about it the most that's what I enjoy about writing in general, is it's, to me, it's fun. It's like you grab this character or you grab the story idea and what happens next? In this world that I'm creating, like, what is happening next? And, there's times where there was one scene in Spirit of Sasquatch that I wrote, and I literally started crying, and I was like, "Dear Lord, what the hell's wrong with me?" I was like, "Why am I crying?" But I was like, I was so into the character and how the character was feeling, and to me it was so real, and that like it could be just that one little nugget that just blossoms into this fun, sometimes crazy story, and you just have to go with it. You just have to run.
Absolutely. So I'm guessing that you do research, but you don't really plot the story very much. You like to enjoy the experience of what's going to happen next.
My secret's out. Yeah, that would probably have to be accurate. I mean, for the Well House, I didn't know where it was going. I'll be honest. I didn't know where that story was going. I just wrote until I felt the story ended. For Spirit of Sasquatch, I had an outline in my mind of where I wanted it to go. I had thoughts, ideas, concepts. I had a general plot of where I wanted it to go. It didn't quite end up where I thought it would, but I'm still happy with the end result. But the story's like a child, right? Like, it's going to do what it wants to do, and you're just trying to you're trying to guide it in the best direction so that it becomes a viable adult. That's the only way I can really explain it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we take our story, we nurture them, we help them grow, and it doesn't always turn out the way we want, but we're still happy. We're still proud of it. So that's fantastic. Well, I think we segued into it pretty well. We've touched on it here and there. Tell us about Spirit of Sasquatch.
Spirit of Sasquatch is about a young boy, about 10, 11 years old, that gets rescued by a Sasquatch creature when he's out in the woods, and he lives with him for a number of years. And during that time, his brother and his father is looking for him, and the government is looking for him. And then at the end, all these groups come together in a climactic conclusion. I wrote it with the idea of not isolating any one Bigfoot group, right? So in the world of Bigfoot researchers, there's more or less two main groups. There's a group that believes Bigfoot is a purely flesh and blood creature that is a undiscovered primate ape animal in North America. There's another group that believes that there's a spiritual element to it, and this stems from the Native Americans. Much of the lore and the legends of Native Americans, they believe that Bigfoot or Sasquatch is a spirit creature that can take physical form. So there's these, two divergent groups. There is a smaller group that believes that Bigfoot comes from UFOs. So when I wrote this, I didn't want to isolate one group or the other. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very fine line to walk down the middle. And I wanted to write it, this might be the teacher in me coming out, but I wanted to write it in a way where if you knew nothing about Bigfoot research, not necessarily the legend of Bigfoot, but Bigfoot research, you could read it and then understand and kind of learn the basics of Bigfoot research. If you're an experienced researcher where you've been out in the field, boots to the ground, you've done the research, you've heard the stories, you've heard the podcasts, then you could read the book and be like, oh, I've heard something similar, or I've experienced that, or, yes, that happened to me. So again, it was to try to not scare one group away or another. So from what I've heard from feedback, supposedly I did a good job with that. But again, it was just, even though those elements were in the forefront of my mind, it was still a fun story to write.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's something right up my alley. I love stories like from Robert McCammon, where it's something fantastic happening in the real world. So I'm looking forward to picking up a copy of this myself. Now, how did you went into some cryptozoology, you did some research and went out into the field doing a little bit of looking for Bigfoot yourself, it sounds like.
Yes. I've always been fascinated with the paranormal and cryptid animals. Bigfoot's always been a huge fascination for me, but I've been actually out in the field, boots on the ground, New Mexico, Colorado, Washington, Montana, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina. Any opportunity and chance I get, if someone's like, hey, you want to go on a Bigfoot expedition? If I have the money, I'm there. I'm definitely all for it. For me, it's about nature. It's about being in the woods. So if I have an experience, great. If I don't have an experience, hey, I'm still out in the woods, so I have nothing to complain about. When I was writing Spirit of Sasquatch, a lot of my research, and I know that this might sound silly to some people, but a lot of my research was pretending to be a Sasquatch creature, right? So, it was this, I got to this point of, so I have this young boy who's with this tribe of Sasquatch creatures. How are they going to interact? How are they going to talk? How is this going to happen? Mm-hmm. And so I would spend lots of times in the woods just wandering, literally in the woods. I've never really gotten lost in the woods, so it never really crossed my mind that I was going to get lost, right? Mm-hmm. But let me put this into perspective. I wasn't in Yellowstone. I wasn't in Yosemite where I was just wandering, right? Like, yes, if I'm going to wander there, good chance I'm probably going to get lost, right? But, on the East Coast, I'm eventually going to run into a house or a road or, somebody, right? So I was never really afraid of getting lost. So it was just this idea of like wandering the game trails, kind of stopping and looking into trees and seeing if I see a tree structure or a tree break or a stack of rocks or a footprint, and then, okay, if I saw one, then what does that mean? Where do I go from there? And so it was just kind of like getting into the mindset of those creatures. And that was probably what I enjoyed the most about my research. It just, gave me an excuse to go wander through the woods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it sounds really cool. I know as I grew up in the outdoors, lots of deer hunting, other things, and I remember I was a teenager. The first time I got to go into the woods on my own, 4 o'clock in the morning before the sun's coming up, and I'm walking out to my deer stand, and every little shadow was spooky. Now, I could be in the woods with my friends, and it's a completely different feeling, But that very first time I'm walking out and every little sound you hear is, oh my gosh, something's coming my way, and it's a squirrel.
Yeah.
You know? Or yeah, every shadow is another creature looking at you as you're walking out there. So I can just imagine putting myself back into that. Well, even as an adult going out in the woods these days, I could still feel that little bit of child in me going, man, it's so easy to get. It would be really easy to get wrapped up in this and let my imagination run.
Oh, I can't tell you how many times I scared myself out in the woods. It's super easy to scare yourself. And I'll tell you a quick funny story. So I'm out. It was early in the morning. It was probably 5 in the morning. I was getting a recorder that I put out. So and I was on this ridge line on this mountaintop in Maryland. And I'm literally hopping from rock to rock on this ridge line because in Maryland, Virginia, a lot of there's lots of rocks, and so I'm literally hopping from rock to rock because I'm trying not to make any sound, and then all of a sudden I hear footsteps on the other side of the ridge, and I was like, whoa, I was like, hold on a second, right? And so I stop and I squat down and I'm listening and I hear distinct 2 feet moving and walking around. And I was like, holy crap, right? And I knew it couldn't be a person, right? I was like, there's no one around. No one knows I'm here. No one knows I put the recorder here, right? And so I'm like, okay. And I was scared, right? Like a part of me was like scared. And finally I was like, dude, man up. Like, this is what you want. Like, this is what you want to see, right? Like, peek over the edge. And so a couple minutes passes, and I finally get my courage up, and I jump from rock to rock, and I get closer to the edge, and I hear this feet moving, and I peek over the edge, and it was a turkey. It was just like, ah! And I'm talking 20 minutes past, 20, 30 minutes passed by for me to like build up my courage to like peek over the edge. And, it never occurred to me that it would be a turkey. But I sat there and laughed and I was just like, oh, you fool.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I have no idea how many times I've been sitting there looking into the woods, daydreaming, and then you hear the crunch, 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 and I'm convinced, oh, there's a giant buck coming up behind me, and I turn around real slow, and yeah, it's just that doggone little bitty squirrel hopping around through the leaves. It's amazing the noise they can make. Golly. But then the big buck does come along, and you never hear a thing.
Right.
And it's just, man, so it's totally believable that Bigfoot might just walk right by and wave at you and disappear before you even realize he was there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure it's happened half a dozen times.
Well, what are you working on now?
So I'm working on a quasi sequel to Spirit of Sasquatch, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of dogmen. Have you heard of the term dogmen?
Okay, yeah.
They're for lack of a better term, a subspecies of Bigfoot or a species of Bigfoot type creature, where they tend to have more of a snout, pointy ears. I guess in a lot of cases you could probably relate it to a werewolf, right? So there's been more and more sightings of those, typically in Michigan, Ohio area. And so I I'm kind of going down this road of exploring the dogmen encounters along with skinwalkers. There's this one little piece of nugget that dogmen could be skinwalkers. And skinwalkers are Native American, typically Navajo, according to legend. I'm not saying that they exist now, but according to legend, they were Navajo shaman that could shapeshift into animals of the skins that they wore. And so I'm kind of exploring this idea of the dogmen and the skinwalkers, and I actually took two of the minor characters from Spirit of Sasquatch and kind of exploring their lives and who they are and, you know, why they were involved. It was two characters that I liked but didn't really explore in Spirit of Sasquatch. I mean, I could have, but I'm really enjoying exploring them now. So
yeah, so same universe essentially.
It's the same universe. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a sequel. I don't know. I'm kind of on this whole fence with, you know, writers have to write a trilogy or have to write 5 or 6 books in a series. Like, I mean, sure, that I don't know. If I was George Lucas, maybe. You know, but I'm not George Lucas, and I just really want to explore these two characters, and I've always been fascinated with skinwalkers. I'm fascinated with the dogmen, and so it gives me a good excuse to research it, learn more about it, and tell a story. So
yeah,
you know, that's kind of where I'm going with it.
That sounds great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a standalone story, even if it is something related to another story, same universe, like what we're saying. I think it sounds really cool.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and if you think about it, I mean, that's really what Robert Heinlein did.
Yeah.
All of his stories were in the same universe, and but not necessarily connected. That's what Ben Bova does. That's what
Stephen King.
Stephen King, you know. So I don't know. It kind of, I think as a writer, it doesn't limit you,
right?
You know, and so then the storytelling for this can be different than it was in Spirit of Sasquatch. You know, so, you know, like there was elements in Spirit of Sasquatch where I would tell a story and have dialogue, but then there was elements where it was a journal entry to like move the story forward, right? So and if I was doing a real sequel, I would stick to that same format. But since this isn't a sequel, I don't have to do that format.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it sounds amazing. I can't wait to check that out when it comes out. Maybe next year. Is that what you're looking at?
I am. I've promised to my dean that I will finish my academic publications for tenure before I release another book. So, so I have one more academic paper to submit, and it should be submitted in January. So I'm hoping that this next book will come out at the end of 2019.
That's great. Where can people find you online or follow you?
They can find me on Facebook. I have a Spirit of Sasquatch page on Facebook. I have a Two Moons Rising. I'm not doing much with that on Facebook right now, but mostly Spirit of Sasquatch Facebook page. And my books are on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and then I'm also on Instagram and Twitter with just my first and last name.
Ernest, it's been a lot of fun talking with you. I had a blast talking with you beforehand. I mean, it definitely seems like you're the kind of guy I could just sit here and talk for hours about all kinds of this stuff and just really go down the rabbit hole. So
whenever you want to go down that rabbit hole, you let me know because I'm all for it.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand the floor over to our guest today, Ernest Solar and Spirit of Sasquatch.
Thank you. So today, the part that I'm going to share with you happens shortly after the main character, Brock, has been rescued by the Sasquatch creature, and he realizes that it actually did happen. Sukum, the thought popped into Brock's head, which caused him to wake from his restless sleep. He rolled over on the bed of dead pine needles to rest on his right side. He kept his eyes closed, not wanting to wake up yet, hoping that his father did not notice him move. He wanted a few more minutes to think about his dream. He tried to contain the smile that wanted to stretch across his lips, but he was pretty sure he was giving himself away as he lay there pretending to sleep. He knew he gave himself away when a giggle slipped out because he heard his father moving behind him. He squeezed his lips shut and waited for his father to shake him awake, but the shake never came. So he figured he had a few more minutes to himself. He giggled again when he remembered how funny it was that Sukum threw the boulder into the river when he was trying to skip it. Sukum, he thought. Brock's eyes popped open at the thought of the name Sukum. He didn't remember the creature telling him his name was Sukum, but somehow Brock knew. Actually, the more he thought about it, he didn't remember the creature even telling him he was a he. Then again, it was pretty obvious. The creature had the same boy parts he had, so it must be a boy. But how did he know his name was Sukum? Maybe at some point in his dream the creature had told him. Maybe he couldn't remember. In either event, the more he thought about it, the more he agreed that the creature did look like a Sukum. Personally, he didn't think he looked like a Brock, but he knew he didn't have a choice in the matter. His father had named him. He asked his father once why he picked the name Brock. His old man laughed and said, "'Cause it was the name of the town where you were born," which confused Brock, because the one time he looked up the town of Brock, there was no hospital located there. But maybe he was born in a different state. He was too afraid to ask his father if that was the case. One time he asked his father what his mother wanted to name him. His father spanked him for that one. That night, while he was crying in bed, his older brother lay next to him and confronted him and advised him to never ask about their mother again. Brock never asked again. The more he thought about it, he didn't even know his mother's name. She felt like a mystery to him. Brock wiped the water that was forming in his eyes and focused on the wall in front of him. It was wood. No, bark. He reached out and touched the rough surface of the bark, and a piece fell away from his hand. He quickly retracted his hand to his chest. Nothing happened. He leaned his head forward just a little bit to peer out the hole and saw the undergrowth of a forest floor and small saplings growing off in the distance. Confused, he rolled onto his back on the dried pine needles and found himself looking at the trunk of a tree that had must have fallen at some point in its life. He looked to his left and saw another wall of bark. He grasped the ground and clutched the pine needles and brought them to his face to get a better look. He dropped the pine needles and sat up as much as he could under the fallen tree. Down by his feet, on his left, he saw an opening. He wiggled around under the trunk so he could crawl out of the shelter head first. He poked his head out the entrance of the crude structure and blinked his eyes several times to adjust to the bright sun. He then stood and looked back at the entrance. He was right. He was laying under a fallen tree, but he wasn't sure how he had gotten there. What had happened to his father's tent? What had happened to the camp? Brock looked around and noticed he was standing in a small clearing surrounded by a thick wall of brambles as tall as he was. He walked over to the brambles to see if there was a way he could crawl through them or push them out of the way, but the thorns were at least an inch thick, and he couldn't even see where the brambles ended. Among the brambles, Brock spied a patch of blackberries. His stomach rumbled and growled at the sight of food. He gently reached out and picked a handful of berries. As he ate the berries, he scratched his head in confusion and walked back to the crude tree shelter. Finishing the small clump of blackberries, he climbed on top of the fallen tree trunk and looked up towards the couple of trees that were still standing inside the bramble patch. They were tall and thick. He guessed they were at least 100 years old. There were no branches for him to climb for at least 50 feet. He jumped down off the tree trunk and landed on his feet. As he did, the creature Sukum landed in front of him in a crouch, as silent as a bird. At a crouch, Sukum was as tall as Brock. He sat there for a moment with the fingertips of his right hand barely touching the dirt. Brock did not move. He had become too afraid to move. Brock started to slowly realize that Sukum was not a dream. Sukum had taken him when they heard his father calling for him. He was alone. Sukum leaned forward slightly and sniffed in Brock's direction. Brock watched as the nostrils on the creature's flat nose twitched with each sniff. Sukum moved slightly closer to Brock as it sniffed him from head to toe. He then tilted his head to the side and looked past Brock to the bedding structure. Brock followed the creature's eyes and saw what it was looking at, the fallen tree with the bed of pine needles. A little bit of the fear he was feeling dissipated, and he asked, "Did you make that?" At the sound of Brock's voice, Sukum snapped his head back to face Brock again. That was when Brock noticed the streak of gray mixed throughout its jet black hair, crossing from the left side of its forehead at an angle down across its right eye, ending at its cheekbone. Sukum's eyes widened, and Brock noticed how yellow his eyes were as he watched him. Sukum's lips spread slightly, almost in a smile, and Brock could see its grayish-white teeth. Brock leaned forward slightly to whisper, "Are you Sukum?" The creature stood to its full height and towered over Brock. Brock had to take a step back and tilt his head completely back in order to see Sukum's face. Sukum stared down at him. Brock turned and scrambled up the fallen tree and stood facing Sukum. This allowed him to look Sukum in the eye without breaking his neck. Sukum stepped forward and stood less than a foot from Brock. Brock smiled and laughed out loud. "You are real," he said, laughing. "I can't believe you are real. I thought you were just a dream." Sukum tilted its head to the right and then back to center. Then it huffed. Brock fell silent. Sukum leaned a little closer again and huffed louder. Huff! The sound came from its throat. Brock could feel the force of exhaled air blast against his face as Sukum's breath escaped its nostrils. Brock imitated the huff back to Sukum as best as he could. Huff! Sukum's whole upper body moved back slightly from the waist and then leaned in towards Brock. The creature let out a roar so powerful that the vibrations knocked Brock off the fallen tree onto his back. After Brock hit the ground, it took him a few seconds to figure out what had just happened. When he did, he was instantly afraid. He shook his head and tried to pull himself away from the fallen tree as best he could, lying on his back. He could see Sukum leaning over the fallen tree looking at him. Brock was about to turn onto his hands and knees to crawl through the thick brambles when they both heard a soft whoop. Brock froze. Sukum perked up and looked around. It let out an equally soft whoop. It then reached over the fallen tree, extending its hand toward Brock. Brock looked at the long, muscular arm covered in black hair, could not comprehend why its hairless hand and fingers were motioning for him to come. Sukum grunted one more time and jammed its hand towards Brock. Brock sat there frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. Sukum glanced up towards the forest and pulled its arm back. It stepped away from the fallen tree and disappeared from view. Then Brock heard a thumping sound behind him. With each thump, the ground under him shook his body as if he was being shaken in an earthquake. He tried to scramble to his feet to see what was making the noise. That vibration of the ground prevented him from being able to stand on his feet. He pushed himself against the bark that was leaning against the fallen tree and hoped whatever was making the thumping sound would pass without noticing him. He was not so lucky. In horror, Brock watched a creature similar to Sukum walk through the brambles directly towards him. The creature was twice as big as Sukum in size and height. Brock watched in shock as the brambles slid away from the creature's white hair. He couldn't understand how the brambles were not snagging or getting tangled in the creature's long hair. When he cleared the brambles, the creature stopped in front of Brock. It reached down and clamped its massive hand over Brock's small head. Palming the boy's head, it lifted him off the ground. Brock's feet dangled in the air. He immediately threw both hands up and clawed at the creature's long, white, matted hair to try and get a grip to hoist himself up to release the pressure on his skull. His hands kept slipping off the creature's hair, as if its hair was coated in some sort of oil that prevented him from grabbing it. He didn't remember Sukum's hair feeling that way. The pain from the grip from his head was beyond bearable. Brock had never felt so much pain before in his life. Tears flooded his eyes and spilled down his face uncontrollably. The creature pulled Brock up to its eye level. Brock blinked through his tears and saw the pure hatred in the creature's dark red eyes. Brock peed his pants in fear. For a moment, the creature watched Brock's urine drip down his leg in a sort of satisfaction. Behind him, Brock thought he heard Sukum growl. The creature that was holding him focused its attention past Brock to Sukum. Then it tossed Brock to the side into the brambled thorns. The shock of the pain around his scalp being released blocked out the pain of the hundreds of brambles that stabbed into his flesh. He rolled out of the brambles onto his stomach and pushed to his knees. As he did, Sukum leapt over the fallen tree to stand in front of the much larger white creature. The larger creature immediately backhanded Sukum across the face. As Sukum's face was turned away from the larger creature, it quickly made eye contact with Brock. Sukum turned back to face the larger creature and screamed louder than anything Brock had ever heard before in his life. The sound was so deafening he clamped his hands over his ears to try and block the noise. The large creature turned towards Brock and then leapt towards him to grab him again. Brock flinched in fear. Sukum stepped forward and shoved the larger creature with both hands. The larger creature lost its balance and fell to the ground. It rolled and came up in a crouch facing Sukum. It sprang at Sukum and knocked him in the chest. They both crashed through the fallen tree. Brock kept his hands over his ears and leaned forward, burying his face in his legs. The sound of the two creatures fighting was more than Brock could bear. He cried uncontrollably and rocked back and forth on his knees. The sounds reminded him of all those times his father and brother had fought because his brother was protecting him. He loved his brother. He wished his brother was with him right now. He needed his brother's strength. He wished he was as strong as his brother. Brock was not sure how much time had passed since the noise of the fighting stopped. He wondered if he had cried himself to sleep while the two creatures were fighting. He slowly pulled his hands away from his ears and confirmed that he did not hear any more growls or screams. He opened his eyes and saw Sukum crouching in front of him. His left eye was swollen shut and blood was caked in its black hair on its right shoulder. But that did not stop Brock from propelling himself into Sukum's arms. He couldn't wrap his small arms around Sukum, but he tried. He burst into tears again, this time from happiness, and tried to press himself into Sukum. Sukum wrapped his left arm around Brock for a moment and let out a long, slow, deep exhale. Brock smiled and felt safe. Sukum stood, and Brock let go of his grasp. This time, when Sukum offered his hand, Brock took it. Sukum picked him up and swung Brock onto his back. Brock squeezed his knees into Sukum's side and draped his arms over the massive creature's shoulders and grasped his long hair to hold on. Sukum flinched a little but moved off into the bramble. As Sukum moved into the brambles, Brock felt the hair on the creature become oily and slick. He watched as the thorns slipped off of Sukum and his own legs. Sukum whooped once, and they both heard a responding whoop not far off in the distance.
That was storyteller and explorer extraordinaire Ernest Solar reading a sample chapter from his Spirit of Sasquatch. It's an awesome book. It looks really, really cool. I can't wait to dive in. I've got a copy on the way. This is really cool. I hope you like that. I hope you're not too upset with me for that little tease about the story of one time when he was out Bigfoot hunting, but I thought it was really, really funny. Couldn't resist. I wanted to make sure that you listen to the episode. Hey, make sure to follow Ernest on his Facebook, his Amazon, his Twitter page. Don't forget to click the links for all of that. And don't forget to subscribe. That way next week you don't miss out when I'm back with another author, another story, and another sample chapter. Thank you, everybody, and have a good week.